I traded a life of inherited wealth for a pauper's exile, only to discover my entire existence was a lie planted by the people I thought I was fighting. The scent of polished mahogany and old money used to be comforting. Now, it just smells like the tomb they built for me. I stood on the manicured gravel of the driveway, the tires of the taxi crunching a final, mocking farewell. Behind me loomed Blackwood Manor, not a home, but a fortress of judgment carved from gray stone, mocking the worn pleather of the suitcase I dragged behind me. "Are you sure you don't want me to wait, sir?" the driver asked, his voice laced with the pity only strangers can afford to give. I forced a smile that felt like broken glass. "No, thank you. I won't be needing a ride back." The finality of those words tasted like ash, but they were true. I was 24 years old, freshly educated at Yale, paid for, of course, with their meticulously clean, ethically dubious millions, and completely, utterly cast out. It had been a spectacular implosion, played out in the oak-paneled drawing room that now felt colder than the December air. My father, Arthur Blackwood, whose face seemed permanently set in the expression of a man smelling bad seafood, had delivered the verdict. "You choose her over everything we built, over the legacy, over the trust, over the future of this entire consortium? You choose the daughter of a pauper who works with her hands?" His voice hadn't risen. It never did. Arthur's anger was a quiet, suffocating pressure, far worse than shouting. "Her name is Clara," I'd managed, my own voice trembling but holding steady, "and she is the only thing in my life that isn't tainted by what you call legacy. She's honest, Dad. She makes things. Beautiful things." Clara, a potter. Her hands, calloused and dusted with clay, were infinitely more appealing to me than the soft, perpetually manicured hands of the corporate heiresses they'd tried to pair me with. Honesty doesn't buy influence, Julian. Love doesn't pay the quarterly dividends. You have until sunrise tomorrow to break off this pathetic engagement, or you are nothing to us. Nothing. My mother, Eleanor, always played the dutiful, silent partner, but her eyes, usually guarded behind designer frames, had been sharp with venom. I didn't wait for sunrise. I walked out at midnight, leaving behind the signet ring, the expensive watch, and the entire carefully curated future they had mapped out for me. Clara was waiting in her sputtering little hatchback, parked discreetly down the lane. She didn't ask questions. She just pulled me close and smelled like earth and lavender, a reality so profound it hurt. Now, staring at the imposing facade of Blackwood Manor, I knew the terms were set. They hadn't just cut off my allowance, they'd liquidated my access. Every bank account tied to the family trust was frozen. My personal savings, a modest fund I'd accumulated doing freelance coding work in college, had vanished under the fine print of the family's emergency clauses specifically designed to punish errant heirs. I had enough cash for a week in Clara's cramped, glorious little studio apartment above a bakery, and that was it. I turned my back on the estate, pulling my threadbare woolen scarf tighter. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint, almost imperceptible hum of the mansion's extensive security system, a system I used to mock as overkill. As I reached the bottom of the drive, something caught my eye, glinting faintly under the weak amber glow of the distant street lamp. It was small, lying half buried in the gravel where my suitcase had scraped the ground. I hesitated, then bent down, brushing away the grit. It was an antique skeleton key. Not a modern security key card, but heavy, old-fashioned brass, intricately filigreed, and attached to it, secured by a thin, brittle length of twine, was a small folded piece of vellum paper, yellowed with age, sealed with a faint, almost invisible wax impression. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't Blackwood Manor. This was a movie set. Who left this here? And why, after all these years of knowing nothing but absolute control, did I suddenly feel like I was on the verge of discovering a secret they desperately wanted, kept buried? I pocketed the key, the cold metal a stark contrast to the sudden heat flooding my face, and started walking toward the nearest bus stop, knowing I had to see Clara, but unable to shake the unsettling certainty that my banishment was not the end of the story, but the very beginning of someone else's dark little game. I hailed a cab 2 blocks away, the vellum crinkling inside my coat pocket, the brass key weighing heavily against my ribs. I told the driver the address of Clara's studio, my mind racing. Why was this key here? It felt too deliberate, too theatrical. And then a cold dread washed over me. I remembered where I'd seen that specific design before. It wasn't the front door key. It was the lock to the restricted archives in the sub-basement, the place my father always said held nothing but dusty tax records from the 1950s. If this key was for the archives, what did it unlock that was worth discarding his only son? When I finally reached the bakery, the smell of fresh sourdough was overpowering. Clara was asleep, curled up on the narrow sofa, illuminated by the pale light spilling from the street lamps. I stood there for a moment, watching her peaceful face, feeling the sharp ache of my choice, worth it every single time, but also the terrifying weight of poverty and uncertainty. I slipped the key and the vellum out, intending to examine them in the morning light. But as I unfolded the brittle paper, the seal cracking audibly in the quiet room, I saw that the message wasn't a warning or a threat. It was a single typewritten line, stark black against the aged paper, a line that made the air freeze in my lungs and instantly negated every certainty I had about my own parentage. The document simply read, "The bloodline is flawed. Verify the adoption papers filed under File 734-B. Your true inheritance awaits the reading of the second will." My breath hitched, a ragged tearing sound in the quiet apartment. Adoption papers? File 734-B? The words were a physical blow, knocking the air from my chest and replacing it with an icy, nauseating rush of confusion. Arthur and Eleanor Blackwood, icons of aristocratic permanence, adoptive parents, the entire edifice of my life, the expectations, the resentments, the very foundation of my inheritance struggle, suddenly looked like a cheap facade about to collapse into dust. I shook my head, trying to force the adrenaline down. This had to be a cruel joke, a planted distraction. My father would never leave a breadcrumb this specific, this volatile. He dealt in blunt instruments, not cryptic literary clues. Yet the key in my other hand felt undeniably real, heavy with intent. I carefully smoothed the vellum out on the small, chipped wooden table Clara used for sketching designs. The typeface was old, crisp, the kind that came from a heavy manual typewriter, not a modern office printer. The bloodline is flawed. That phrase echoed the chilling dismissal from the night before, but twisted. It implied that the flaw wasn't my choice of Clara, but something inherently wrong with me. Clara stirred on the sofa, mumbling something about needing more glaze before settling back into sleep. I couldn't wake her. This was a darkness I needed to confront alone, at least for now. Waking her would only drag her into a storm that was purely mine. I spent the next hour cross-referencing every term. Second will. The Blackwood estate had always operated under the terms of the original settlement trust, established by my great-grandfather, but I knew that major estate changes sometimes required a codicil, or a secondary document filed with the family lawyer, old Mr. Hemlock, who was probably nearing 90 but still guarding their secrets. The adoption papers, however, were the real grenade. I had always been told that the shame of the Blackwood line was their rigid adherence to purity of name, something they'd constantly drilled into me, ironically, as they groomed me to take over. If I wasn't a Blackwood by blood, then my entire claim on their world and their subsequent rejection of me was based on a lie they clearly went to great lengths to maintain. Driven by a sudden, frantic need to ground myself, I reached into the pocket containing the key and pulled out my phone, ignoring the late hour. I didn't dare call my father or mother. The lines were certainly monitored, and any inquiry would alert them that I hadn't just walked away, but was actively investigating. Instead, I searched for the only person I knew who might possess a shred of professional ethics left in the Blackwood orbit, Mr. Hemlock's firm, Hemlock & Sons. After several failed attempts to reach an emergency line, I found an old, almost forgotten email address for a junior partner listed on the website, a man named David Sterling, who had once politely refused to cover up a minor traffic violation for me in college, citing professional ethics. A long shot, but perhaps the only one. I typed out a concise, chillingly formal email, omitting any mention of Clara or the disinheritance, focusing only on the legal implications of the stated documents. Subject: urgent clarification. Regarding Blackwood Estate, Succession and Historical Trust Amendments. Dear Mr. Sterling, I require immediate, confidential clarification regarding the existence and location of any document titled Second Will, pertaining to the estate of Arthur Blackwood Sr., and any sealed legal filings referenced by the designation File 734-B. This pertains to potential historical inaccuracies in the primary trust documentation. Your immediate response is required before further legal action must be taken. Julian Blackwood. I hit send before I could second-guess the sheer audacity of demanding answers from my enemy's counsel. Then I looked at the brass key again. It was ornate, heavy, and unmistakably old. I needed to know what it opened. The only place that key could possibly connect to the known assets was Blackwood Manor itself, the archives. The thought of returning to that house, walking back across that gravel drive under the cold scrutiny of the security cameras, was terrifying. But the alternative, living a life built on a borrowed name, was unthinkable. The adoption papers could explain everything. Why they were so demanding, why they valued blood purity above all else, and why they might discard me so easily if the truth ever came out. I looked at the window. The eastern sky was just beginning to bleed a faint, sickly gray. Dawn was approaching, the deadline my father had set. If I showed up empty-handed tomorrow, they would certainly enforce their threat. I needed proof. I needed to see what was in File 734-B. I pulled Clara close, kissing the top of her head, whispering a promise to return before she woke. Then I slipped out of the studio and walked toward the main road, my eyes scanning for the first early morning bus heading downtown, toward the center of the city where the financial district and the Blackwood monolith stood. I made it back to the perimeter of Blackwood Manor just as the first sliver of the actual sun broke the horizon, painting the sky in oranges and violent reds. I moved through the overgrown laurel hedges, sticking to the shadows of the ancient oaks, the key warm now from my body heat. The main house was dark, silent, seemingly asleep, but the grounds were never unguarded. I located the service entrance, tucked around the back where the groundskeepers stored their equipment. It was a heavy iron-reinforced door, secured by a modern digital keypad. Useless for my antique key. Disappointment was a lead weight in my stomach. I circled the house, my nerves screaming at me to retreat, until I found it. A small, rarely used side door, leading perhaps to the wine cellar or an old coal chute, set into the oldest section of the foundation. It was weathered wood and set almost flush with the stone was a tarnished, heavy brass lock, the exact twin of the key in my hand. My hands were shaking so violently I almost dropped the key. I jammed it in, turned it with agonizing slowness, listening for the telltale clunk of the deadbolt releasing. It clicked open. Silence. I pushed the door inward an inch. The air that rushed out was stale, heavy with the smell of damp earth and something metallic, like old pennies. I slipped inside, pulling the door silently shut behind me, plunging myself into absolute darkness. I fumbled for the small, cheap flashlight I'd grabbed from Clara's utility drawer. The beam cut through the oppressive blackness, illuminating a narrow stone staircase spiraling downward. This wasn't a wine cellar. This was a descent into the earth. I followed the stairs down, 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 until the temperature dropped sharply and the metallic scent intensified. The staircase ended abruptly in a solid, ancient-looking wooden door, banded with iron. And there, set squarely in the center of the wood, was an equally ornate keyhole. This was it, the archives. I inserted the key. It slid in perfectly, the mechanism groaning in protest after years of disuse. I turned it. A deep, resonant thud echoed through the subterranean space. I pushed the door open, swinging it wide into the darkness. My flashlight beam sliced through the gloom. Instead of dusty shelves of ledgers, I was staring into a small, climate-controlled vault. In the center, sitting on a metal pedestal, bathed in the thin light, was a single, perfectly preserved mahogany box, inlaid with silver script. It looked less like a storage container and more like a reliquary. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might rupture a rib. I approached the box, my fingers trembling as I reached out to lift the heavy lid. As my fingers brushed the cool wood, a low, synthesized voice boomed from hidden speakers, cutting through the silence like a physical shockwave. Intruder detected. Access code required. Access code is the surname of the primary guardian of the Blackwood Trust. I froze, the blood draining from my face. I knew the name. I had known it since I was 5 years old. But now, with the adoption papers' accusation ringing in my ears, a dreadful, horrible possibility dawned on me. Which surname? My adopted father's? Or the name of the person who actually gave me life? I had seconds to decide before the inevitable security response hit, and I knew Arthur Blackwood's security would respond with extreme prejudice. I shouted the only name that had ever mattered to me, the name that was now my curse. Blackwood! The box remained locked. I realized, too late, that I had chosen the lie. Then, from the shadows at the far end of the small vault, a scraping sound echoed, the sound of heavy machinery activating. My flashlight flickered, momentarily illuminating a massive, reinforced steel door on the opposite wall, which was beginning to grind open, revealing not another room, but a blindingly bright, sterile white corridor, bathed in an unnatural, humming light that smelled faintly of ozone. And standing silhouetted in that doorway, holding something long and metallic, was a figure I instantly recognized, the private security contractor who used to train me in self-defense, a man who had always looked at me with unsettling detachment. He raised the object, a heavy-duty stun baton, and smiled, a cold, professional expression devoid of humanity. "Wrong answer, Julian. It seems the real guardian has been waiting for you." The ozone smell hit me like a physical wave, sharp and metallic, mingling with the damp earth and the fear tightening my throat. The security contractor, Marcus, I remembered now, a former Special Forces operative Arthur had hired directly, was blocking the only other potential exit. He moved with predatory grace, the stun baton humming ominously in his gloved hands, its coiled wires sparking slightly in the sterile light pouring from the white corridor. "Wrong answer, Julian," Marcus repeated, his voice flat, amplified by the acoustics of the small vault. "It seems the real guardian has been waiting for you." My mind raced. If Blackwood was the wrong code, then the only other possible guardian was the one mentioned in that damning vellum slip, the one associated with File 734-B. I didn't know that name. I had no time to guess. The box remained sealed, mocking me, and Marcus was advancing, closing the distance with terrifying speed. I didn't try to reason with him. Marcus wasn't a guard. He was an enforcer, programmed for immediate termination of unauthorized access. I spun away from the mahogany box, kicking out blindly at the pedestal, trying to knock the whole thing over, hoping to buy a fraction of a second. The box, however, seemed anchored, immovable. Marcus lunged. I ducked under the sweeping arc of the baton, the high-pitched snap of the discharge passing inches over my head, leaving the faint, singed smell of burnt hair in its wake. I scrambled back toward the stone staircase, the only path back to the known world. "Going up," Marcus called out, sounding mildly annoyed rather than aggressive. He didn't chase immediately. He seemed confident, savoring the hunt. I took the first 3 stone steps in a desperate scramble before my foot caught on something loose. I pitched forward, slamming hard onto the cold stone, the cheap flashlight skittering away, plunging me into suffocating darkness once more. Silence descended again, broken only by my own ragged breathing and the faint, unnerving hum from the white corridor. Where was the flashlight? I patted the stone wildly, my fingers brushing against gritty mortar and the cold, damp underside of the stairs. Then I heard it. Not Marcus's measured footsteps, but a different sound. A soft click from behind the sealed mahogany box. The box. It had registered my second attempt, perhaps triggered by the sound of my fall. The synthesized voice returned. Quieter this time, almost a whisper in the oppressive dark. "Code accepted. Guardian designation, Alara." Alara. It wasn't a surname. It was a first name, a name I had never heard associated with the Blackwood dynasty, never mentioned by my parents in their endless recitations of acceptable society. A soft internal mechanism whirred within the mahogany box. The silver inlay glowed faintly, and the lid swung open silently, revealing not jewels or secrets, but a single item nestled inside on black velvet, a small sealed manila envelope, clearly contemporary, and next to it a single black and white photograph, glossy and sharp. I snatched the envelope, my fingers fumbling for the cheap plastic casing of the flashlight I'd finally located. I flicked it on, aiming the beam at the photograph before even daring to open the envelope. The photo was a portrait. A baby, no more than 6 months old, swaddled in a pale blue blanket. The baby's face was undeniably familiar. The exact curve of the jaw, the shape of the ears. It was my face, but behind the baby, partially obscured in shadow, stood a woman. She was young, vibrant, and looked nothing like the austere Eleanor Blackwood. And clutched in her hand, visible even in the grainy photo, was a delicate silver locket shaped like a blooming rose, the exact locket Clara wore around her neck every single day. A paralyzing shock rooted me to the spot. Clara's mother? My birth mother? I tore open the manila envelope. Inside was a single sheet of legal paper, crisp and official, bearing the seal of a high-profile, defunct law firm from a different state entirely. It was a custody decree, dated 24 years prior. My eyes scanned the crucial lines, seeking confirmation of the adoption. I found it, but it wasn't what I expected. It wasn't an adoption decree. It was a court order establishing guardianship, temporary, binding, and signed by a judge who had mysteriously disappeared from the bench shortly after the ruling. The order stated that Arthur and Eleanor Blackwood were granted temporary guardianship of Julian Alara Blackwood, pending a full background check on the biological parents, who were listed only as voluntarily relinquishing Party A and Party B. But the final devastating paragraph wasn't about my adoption. It was a restrictive covenant, a terrifying legal cage placed upon the Blackwoods themselves. Should the named guardians fail to meet the stipulated moral and ethical benchmarks set forth in the preliminary trust agreement within 25 calendar years, or should any documented evidence arise proving the falsification of the guardian standing, all assets, holdings, and controlling interests of the Blackwood Consortium shall immediately and irrevocably revert to the ward, Julian Alara Blackwood, upon his 25th birthday, to be administered solely by the designated executor of the supplementary trust. My 25th birthday was 3 months away, not now. I wasn't officially entitled to it yet, but then I looked at the envelope again. There was a small adhesive sticker on the back flap, almost invisible. It was a postal tracking sticker, dated yesterday, and scribbled across it in my mother's elegant, looping script was a single word: too late. They hadn't been disinheriting me because I chose Clara. They were throwing me out before my 25th birthday because they knew this document existed, knew the clock was ticking, and realized that if I stayed, I would eventually find the truth and inherit everything they held dear. They were trying to cut the cord before the legal mechanism snapped into place. The white light from the corridor flared, pulsing brighter, and Marcus let out a low whistle of frustration. "The box opened, Julian! That means we're out of time." He took another charging step, but this time he wasn't alone. 2 more figures similarly clad in black tactical gear emerged from the blinding white hallway behind him. They were flanking him. "The executor is here," Marcus stated, dropping the pretense of professional courtesy, "and he's already reviewing the terms of surrender." Before I could even process the threat of 3 armed men, the central figure in the white light stepped forward. He wasn't wearing black tactical gear. He was wearing an impeccably tailored charcoal gray suit, holding a slim leather briefcase, and he was smiling, a slow, indulgent smile that sent a jolt of immediate cold recognition through me. It was David Sterling, the junior partner from Hemlock & Sons, the very man I had emailed just hours ago, begging for guidance. He looked down at the open, glowing mahogany box, then up at me, the legal document clutched in my hand. "Hello, Julian," David Sterling said, his voice smooth, betraying no hint of the panicked plea I'd sent him earlier. "It seems your parents made a rather significant oversight in managing the estate's transition clauses. They thought they had until next spring. But you found the key, and you found the real executor." He tapped the briefcase meaningfully. Now, let's discuss how you intend to administer your new empire. David Sterling's smile was the most terrifying thing I had ever witnessed. The calm, predatory grin of a shark circling injured prey. The three armed figures flanking him, Marcus included, stood like statues, their weapons held at a non-threatening yet utterly commanding ready position. They weren't here to silence me. They were here to install me. "The supplementary trust?" I managed, my voice a dry rasp. My entire body felt disconnected, vibrating with shock. "You're the executor?" Sterling nodded, walking slowly into the vault, his expensive leather shoes clicking softly on the stone floor, the sound far louder than the heavy footsteps of the armed men. He stopped just short of the pedestal, casting a shadow over the now open mahogany box. "Indeed, Julian, I was the chosen administrator for the contingency clause, a fail-safe installed by your true guardians, long before Arthur and Eleanor ever got their hands on you. They thought they could discard you before the 25th year, betting on your ignorance and their absolute control over documentation. A classic Blackwood miscalculation, underestimating the necessity of thorough record-keeping." He paused, his eyes flicking down to the custody decree in my hand. "You see, the Blackwoods never adopted you, Julian. They merely gained temporary guardianship over the child of a very powerful, very paranoid family who required secrecy above all else. And when Arthur and Eleanor broke the stipulated ethical code in ways you are likely already aware of concerning their more ruthless business practices, the contingency activated early." My mind spun, trying to reconcile the cold legal maneuvering with the raw, emotional betrayal of the past 24 hours. Disinherited for love, only to discover the inheritance was never truly theirs to give away. And the woman in the photo, Clara's mother, was part of this secret lineage. "Clara's mother," I breathed, clutching the photo tighter. "Alara." Sterling's smile widened infinitesimally. "A shrewd observer, Julian. Yes, Alara was very concerned about your welfare, should Arthur and Eleanor prove inadequate guardians. She insisted on the supplementary trust, ensuring that if they failed you, you would inherit what they stole." "Stole?" I echoed, the word thick with accusation. "Oh, their entire portfolio wasn't built on shrewd business, Julian. It was built on leverage, deceit, and outright theft from smaller enterprises. Enterprises Alara's family owned. The Blackwoods were meant to manage the assets until you came of age, not bleed them dry. That's why your parents were so quick to push you out the door the second you fell for someone connected to that past." The reality was overwhelming. My entire life had been a lie constructed to hide a legal mechanism designed to ruin my supposed parents. And now David Sterling, the man whose firm served them, was telling me he controlled the trigger. "So what happens now?" I asked, trying to project a confidence I absolutely did not feel. I needed to buy time, need to get out of this basement and tell Clara. Sterling clapped his hands once, a sharp, decisive sound. "Now Marcus and the team escort you upstairs. You will present yourself to Arthur and Eleanor. They will be expecting your final departure note, not your triumphant return. They will be informed that their guardianship has been legally revoked by the executor. You are taking control of the consortium, effective immediately." He gestured towards the white corridor, the hum growing louder, more insistent, almost demanding compliance. "I control the Blackwood Consortium overnight without knowing anything about how it actually operates?" "Don't worry about the day-to-day," Sterling purred. That's what my firm is for. We've been managing the subsidiary holding companies for years, ensuring the assets remain solvent while Arthur and Eleanor made their glorious mess. We simply transition the ultimate fiduciary authority to you. You are the beneficiary, Julian. You simply need to sign the transfer documents, take the keys, and accept the title. He nodded to Marcus, who stepped forward, his expression grim. Let's go, Mr. Blackwood. Time is of the essence. The board convenes in 2 hours. Marcus moved to stand beside me, his imposing presence making any resistance seem utterly futile. I felt the cold metal of the key in my pocket, the brittle paper beneath my coat. I had the power now, the ultimate leverage against the people who discarded me. But it was a power handed to me by a stranger whose allegiances were as murky as the history I'd just uncovered. As Marcus guided me up the cold stone stairs, I looked back down at Sterling. He was examining the open box, his expression one of detached satisfaction. "One more thing, Sterling," I called down, my voice echoing in the stairwell. If Alara was so concerned about my welfare, why wait until I was disinherited before activating this? Why not intervene sooner? Sterling looked up, his smile fading, replaced by a look of genuine, chilling regret. He held up the old photograph of the baby and the woman with Clara's mother's locket. "Because, Julian," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "Alara didn't just insist on a contingency for the assets. She insisted on a contingency for you. You see, she wasn't just worried about Arthur and Eleanor's business ethics. She was worried about their security protocols." He tapped the black and white photo one last time, his gaze piercing. "The adoption papers they showed you, they were real, Julian. Alara did relinquish you, but not to the Blackwoods. She placed you in a highly secure, undisclosed location years ago, for your own protection, under a pseudonym she carefully curated. She only set up the second will with us to protect the estate if the Blackwoods failed their guardianship." He stepped fully into the light of the corridor, and behind him the figures of the 2 other guards shifted, revealing they weren't just security contractors. They were carrying specialized medical bags, not weapons. "The issue," Sterling concluded, his voice suddenly hard, "is that the moment you use that key, the key meant only for the archive's primary lock, you triggered the failsafe that alerts the location of the ward. You just led them straight to where you grew up." And then the humming stopped entirely. Instead, a high-pitched, piercing alarm blared from the hidden speakers above, an alarm that sounded less like a bank breach and more like a medical emergency signal. "They know you're here, Julian," Sterling hissed, his composure finally cracking as he barked orders to the 2 new figures. "Get him out, now! They aren't coming to prosecute you for theft. They are coming to take back what they think is theirs." Marcus shoved me forward toward the stairwell entrance, but as I stumbled up the last step and burst through the creaking service door onto the dew-covered lawn, I saw it. A sleek, black, unmarked helicopter descending rapidly over the eastern wing of the manor, its searchlight swinging wildly, bypassing the main gate entirely, aimed directly at the area where Clara's little hatchback was still parked down the road. The sudden blast of the chopper's downwash hit me like a physical wall, whipping the grass around my ankles and tearing at my scarf. Marcus shoved me with brutal efficiency, yelling something unintelligible over the roar. "Go, get to the groundskeeper's shed. I'll cover the perimeter." I didn't hesitate. The truth had cascaded down on me in suffocating layers. The Blackwoods hadn't been my biological parents, but temporary, flawed custodians. Sterling and Alara's contingency plan was in place, but my own reckless curiosity, that damned key, had activated the secondary alarm, alerting the other set of guardians. The ones who knew where I was really raised, the ones who had placed me in hiding in the first place. I sprinted across the lawn, my lungs burning, the heavy thud of the helicopter blades drowning out everything else. I risked a glance back. Sterling and the two figures I initially mistook for enforcers were scrambling back toward the open vault door, their professional demeanor replaced by stark panic. They weren't worried about Marcus. They were worried about the people coming from the air. I reached the cover of the dense laurel hedge, separating the manor grounds from the public road. I had to get to Clara. If Alara had placed me somewhere safe years ago, and Clara was the daughter of Alara, then the connection was far deeper than a mere romance. Clara wasn't just my love, she was potentially my last remaining tether to the truth of my origin. I burst through the hedge, heart hammering, and saw the helicopter hovering directly over the small alleyway, where Clara's hatchback was usually concealed by the overhang of the bakery's upper floor. The searchlight pinned the small car in its unforgiving beam. They were already there. I sprinted down the pavement, screaming Clara's name, fueled by a terror that eclipsed the fear of my supposed parents' wrath. As I rounded the corner, I saw movement. Two figures were dragging a resisting Clara out of the alleyway toward the chopper's open hatch. They were not wearing military gear. They were wearing crisp, sterile white hazmat suits, the kind designed for total environmental isolation. "Clara, stop!" I roared, pulling the brittle vellum and the heavy brass key from my pockets, clutching them like weapons. The figures paused, looking up at the sudden, panicked arrival of the disinherited son. One of them held a syringe, long and ominous. Before they could react, David Sterling erupted from the shadows of the street corner, having clearly sprinted from the basement exit much faster than his tailored suit should have allowed. He was not wearing his professional calm. His face was white with genuine fear. "Stop! She is not the primary subject!" Sterling shrieked at the figures in white. "The contingency is on the boy. Julian is the ward." The figures ignored him. The one holding the syringe advanced on Clara. It was then that I understood Alara's deepest fear, not that Arthur and Eleanor would destroy the assets, but that they would expose or contaminate the child they had hidden. And perhaps Clara, as Alara's daughter, was being targeted as a secondary risk, or perhaps she was the key to my location. I didn't think. I acted. I hurled the heavy brass key with every ounce of strength I possessed. It struck the nearest white suit squarely on the shoulder pauldron with a loud clang. The figure flinched, staggering slightly. That second was all Sterling needed. He pulled a small, sophisticated remote device from his pocket and slammed a button. The roar of the helicopter overhead instantly cut out, replaced by an ear-splitting electronic shriek that seemed to come from everywhere at once, a counter-frequency, perhaps designed to disable their specialized gear. The two figures in white immediately dropped Clara and seized up, clutching their helmets, emitting strangled sounds. They were neutralized, perhaps paralyzed by the sound wave. Clara, sobbing but relatively unharmed, scrambled away from them, turning towards the sudden noise, her eyes wide. She saw me, she saw Sterling, and she saw the chaos surrounding her sputtering car. "Julian, what is happening?" she cried. I ran to her, pulling her behind the solid brick base of the bakery wall, away from the immobilized white suits. "We have to go, now. They aren't the Blackwoods people, Clara. They're the real security, and they think you know where I'm supposed to be." Sterling staggered up, clutching his own ears, his expensive suit dusted with grit from his sprint. He pointed a trembling finger toward the far end of the street, away from the manor. The documents. The decree. It means you control the consortium, Julian. But you have to survive long enough to use it. The people who set up that trust, Ilara's people, they're meticulous. They don't just protect assets, they protect the lineage. They think you've been compromised by the Blackwoods. They think I'm compromised because I used their fail-safe key. He looked directly at me, the executor now desperate, his authority stripped away by his own protocol. They are converging on this location now, Julian. They will take you into custody, a protective custody you will never escape. You must destroy those papers and disappear. Now, go back to the life you chose. It's the only safe place left. He threw his briefcase onto the pavement, sending vital documents scattering across the asphalt like confetti. Then, without another word, Sterling turned and sprinted back toward the manor, plunging back into the darkness of the basement entrance, disappearing as fast as he had appeared. I looked down at the scattered papers, the deed to the entire Blackwood Empire, now worthless legal debris, and then at the trembling figure of Clara. If I ran now, I would be free, truly free, back in the simple, honest life I'd tried to build. But I wouldn't be Julian Blackwood. I'd be a ghost running from a ghost empire. I took Clara's hand, pulling her away from the chaos. We ran down the narrow alley, away from the helicopter, away from the paralyzed figures, away from the scent of ozone and betrayal. We didn't stop until we reached the main road, merging into the early morning traffic. Two frightened people with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the knowledge that they had just upended the lives of the richest people in the state. Clara squeezed my hand, her eyes fierce despite her fear. "We're leaving the city. We're going somewhere they can't track clay dust." I nodded, looking back one last time toward the distant silhouette of Blackwood Manor, knowing the inheritance was lost, the legal battle unwinnable against a force disorganized. But as my fingers closed around the worn photograph of the baby and the woman with the rose locket, I realized something vital Sterling had missed. "No, my love," I whispered, a genuine smile finally breaking through the fear. "We're not running from them. We're going to find her. We're going to find Ilara. Because if she was willing to set up a system to protect the assets from the Blackwoods, imagine what she built to protect the person she truly loved." As the bus pulled away, carrying us toward the distant, unfamiliar horizon, I knew the power wasn't in the documents or the money. It was in the bloodline I didn't know I had, and somewhere out there, a mother was waiting, holding the real map to my future. And for the first time since I left the manor, I felt rich,